When it comes to finding the perfect diet for weight loss and muscle gain, you're probably wondering what foods you need to eat. Well, today I'm not only going to talk about specific foods to eat, but I'm going to break down all the important things you need to consider with your diet to finally lose the weight and get the look you're after. Okay, while this video is about your diet plan when it comes to weight loss and muscle gain, I quickly want to make sure you understand the exercise side of things is important too. And a common mistake you don't want to make here is becoming a cardio bunny. So since this video is about weight loss and muscle gain, I'm assuming that muscle is important to you, but even if it wasn't, you still want to make resistance training a high priority in your exercise plan. Not only is this the only way you can gain muscle and get the look you're after, but it's also one of the most powerful tools there are out there for fat loss, as the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolism is going to be as you burn more calories at rest. So I personally recommend training between about 3 and 5 days per week and adding cardio as necessary to help create a calorie deficit. But as far as how much cardio to do, that really depends, and I have a video that I'll link in the description below you can check out after this video, as this one's going to be long enough and I want to stick mostly to nutrition. Anyway, when it comes to your diet to build and maintain muscle mass and help with your fat loss goals, one of the most important things you need to consider is consuming a high protein diet. There's a few reasons for this. One being, in order to build muscle, protein synthesis has to be greater than protein breakdown, so you need plenty of protein to balance this in your favor. Now, while it's difficult to build muscle in a calorie deficit, not necessarily impossible, but difficult, unless you're new to strength training or coming back from a long layoff, if nothing else, a high protein diet is still important to make sure you keep as much muscle as possible, because it does become easier to lose muscle while in a calorie deficit. The second reason protein is important is because of its high thermic effect of food, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically how many calories your body burns just processing the food you eat. Protein has by far the highest thermic effect of all the macronutrients, burning around 25 to 30% of the calories you consume from protein, whereas it's only about 5 to 8% for carbs and only 2 to 3% for fat. And the third reason protein is important is because it's very filling, as it significantly reduces the hormone ghrelin, which ghrelin is nicknamed the hunger hormone because as ghrelin elevates, you feel hungrier. So protein helps fight hunger through the process better than anything else. Some examples of foods that are high in protein but low in carbs and fat are things like skinless chicken and turkey breast, tilapia, tuna, and mini white fishes, lean beef, egg whites, many seafoods like shrimp and lobster, low or non-fat Greek yogurts and cheeses, and whey protein. To make sure you're getting the maximum benefit from protein, I recommend eating around 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight, with the usual recommendation being basically 1 gram per pound. However, if you have a lot of weight to lose and this becomes more unrealistic, then just take somewhere roughly around a goal weight and use that. From there, the other two macronutrients to consider are carbs and fats, but there's a couple things we need to keep in mind before I go into more detail on those. If it wasn't obvious by now, I highly recommend tracking your intake. Now, does this mean you have to track your intake to lose weight? Of course not, but it's the only way to know for sure how much you're eating and what kind of adjustments to make when you reach those unavoidable plateaus. Now, if you haven't been tracking and you have no clue how much you've been eating, don't worry. What I would just recommend is taking the next week, continue to eat the same way you've been eating, but now you're actually going to track it, and then take an average of those days for the week, and this will give you a rough idea of what your current habits look like. If you're already losing weight, then great, you know this is now a deficit for you. Or if you're maintaining your weight, at least you have your maintenance calories, and you can use that to determine how to create a deficit. How to make those adjustments is in that video in the description I talked about before. But for the sake of this video, I want to help you set up a good macro split for what I consider to be the most optimal for losing fat and building muscle. So you already know for protein, I recommend around 1 gram per pound of body weight. So then from there, the next macronutrient I would set is your fat, and I would consume around 20 to 30% of your calories from fat. If you prefer fat over carbs, aim for the higher side. If you prefer carbs over fat, aim for the lower side. And if you're someone who thinks that a higher carb or higher fat diet is superior for fat loss, let me just say this isn't something you need to worry about, as research has shown as long as total calories and protein are equated, the difference for fat loss as well as health markers are the same. So catering more to your preferences can help with adherence and sustainability, but more on that later. Anyway, fat is important because it aids in digestion, it aids in hormone support, and it helps with nutrient uptake. And fat is an essential nutrient, so you're typically not going to want to let your fat drop much more than below 20%. Some good sources of the unsaturated fat, which are typically known as the healthy fats, which I'll touch more on that in a bit, are things like nuts, seeds, egg yolks, oils like olive oil, and avocados. Once you have your protein and fat set, now you know the rest of your calories are going to carbs. Keeping in mind that 1 gram of protein is 4 calories, 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. Since carbs are your body's main energy source, of course, they're important for things like performance and those energy levels. In fact, when it comes specifically to muscle, I would argue that carbs are a bit more important because carbs are protein sparing and they're going to help fuel your performance to help with building that muscle. Some good sources of carbs are things like oats, potatoes, rice, fruits and vegetables, pastas, and breads. But it's important to know all these foods that I'm listing aren't magic. This is arguably the most commonly misunderstood thing about foods. There isn't a single food on the planet that automatically stores as fat, nor is there a single food on the planet that automatically burns fat. It's the context of your overall diet that really matters, and nothing matters more than your macronutrient intake. Now, that's not to say that food quality doesn't matter. I'm not saying that at all. Your diet absolutely should be based around whole, nutrient-dense, minimally processed foods, as these foods are typically going to be more filling, more vitamins and minerals, as these obviously have healthy properties and are going to help you feel better. However, not only has there been plenty of research like this study that showed when one group ate 4% of their calories from sugar and the other 44% from sugar, but macros were equated, there was no significant difference in fat loss or health markers. Not only that, but there's been several other studies that have compared high GI versus low GI carbs, which are typically considered your simple versus complex carbs, and they showed no difference as well. So we have to throw out this "you can only eat clean foods" argument, but even if we weren't even considering the results you might get from certain foods, you can't overlook the mental side of things, and the sustainability of your diet and your relationship with food is critical for any long-term success. This is part of why I suggest tracking macros at least for a while to help you build the knowledge base around foods, and it gives you the flexibility to include things you do enjoy into your diet while still seeing results. If you just follow some random diet with a name and it says eat this, don't eat that, sure, you might see results, but the problem is it doesn't really teach you anything. And it can lead to a poor relationship with food, which often causes people to fall into the all or nothing mentality. If they feel like they can't stick to it perfectly, then what's the point? When you do, this leads you to feel guilty, to beat yourself up, and in my opinion, the mental side of this process is the big reason why very few people ever lose the weight and keep it off long term. So sure, if you look at an apple versus a chocolate bar side by side, the apple would probably be the better, healthier choice. However, I would make the argument that if having that chocolate bar helps you feel satisfied and be able to continue to stick to the plan, whereas the apple makes you feel more restricted and you eventually go off the deep end, then in my opinion, you could make the argument that the chocolate bar was the better choice in that scenario. So this is why you don't hear me say you need to eat exactly this or give you an exact food plan, as that's not only not sustainable, but every person is different. You can't give one plan to the whole world and expect everyone to respond the same. Now, people will take this to the extreme, and I kind of made this mistake early on myself, and just say, okay, you can eat some junk, so I'm just gonna eat as much junk as humanly possible and fit it into my numbers. Trust me when I tell you, you will not feel good when you do that, even if you can get results that way. Which, speaking of food quality, one thing I do recommend tracking besides just macronutrients is your fiber intake, as foods higher in fiber are typically higher in micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. Of course, there's ways to skirt the system, and you can do things like supplementing or whatever else, so you still want to eat plenty of nutrient-dense foods, as things like fruits and vegetables that have high fiber are going to help you feel full and have a high thermic effect of food, both very similar to protein. And trust me when I tell you, if you try to eat low quality foods when calories are low, you're gonna be really hungry and it's easy to overeat. I recommend eating between 1 and 2 grams of fiber per 100 calories you consume, understanding that you can do more, but you have to watch out for things like GI stress, gasiness, bloating, constipation, and things like that, because while fiber is good, a lot of people will hear something is good and then think, well, a crap load of it must be really good, but that's not usually the case. but everyone can handle fiber loads differently, so pay attention to what works best for you. Now there actually is one more macronutrient I haven't discussed yet, and that is alcohol, which comes in at 7 calories per gram. But I think it's safe to say that alcohol isn't exactly going to help any fat loss or muscle building goals, but that doesn't mean it needs to be completely avoided either. You can still drink in moderation and get the same results as long as you're accounting for those calories. It's when you're drinking more heavily that it's likely to have more negative effects. But you do have to factor in that one, alcohol is not going to be filling. Just drinking those calories isn't going to do anything for controlling hunger, and alcohol lowers your inhibitions, and it can be easy to stop carrying as much when you've been consuming alcohol, and that can make it easier to overdo it with your calorie intake through other foods. I personally still include alcohol in my cutting phases, usually just limiting it to a couple drinks on the weekend when I go out to eat with my family. And yes, you can still go out to eat and see results. Okay, something else you need to consider here is, while I know the title says weight loss, but understand it's not really weight loss you're after, it's fat loss, and the two are not necessarily one of the same. This is especially true if you're new to training and getting some of those newbie gains, so to speak, where you're building muscle relatively quickly and you're losing body fat at the same time. You can absolutely see great improvements to your body composition without much or any change to your body weight. In fact, the most extreme example I can remember was a lady who started with me, and she lost 5 inches from her waist before losing a single pound. So while it's good to pay attention to the scale and understand that it's just data, it's not the be all end all, you also want to pay attention to pictures, measurements, paying attention to how clothes are fitting and things like that. But assuming you're not new to training and you're just trying to hold on to as much muscle as possible while cutting, then you want to lose no more than about 1% of your body weight on average per week, as more than this is creating a higher risk for potential muscle loss. I cannot stress this enough. The faster you lose weight, the more likely you are to lose muscle mass and see greater reductions in your metabolism. So patience here is key, and I'm telling you, lack of patience is probably the #1 killer for lasting results. Okay, now there's one thing you have to understand about going through a cutting phase, and that is your metabolism is adaptive, which means nothing you do can possibly work forever. This is why you see weight loss plateaus. Not only do you lose weight, so therefore you're carrying less mass and have less energy demand, but research has shown, especially in more extreme deficits, the suppression in your hormones is greater than would be predicted by the amount of weight lost too. So as your body adapts, you are going to have to make adjustments to keep fat loss going. There are a couple things you can do, like taking things like consecutive day refeeds and diet breaks that can help potentially minimize some of these adaptations. For simplification, it's basically where you eat around maintenance calories for a couple days to weeks, which, as mentioned, may have some hormonal and metabolic benefits, not to mention the mental benefits that come with enjoying more food for a while. But please understand, this is not the same as a cheat meal where you go on some sort of free-for-all. Doing that can easily negate any calorie deficit you had created prior to that. And that's not even to mention the mental implications of using the term cheat. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't like shove your grandma down the stairs. No, you had something like a donut. There's nothing to feel guilty about. Okay, now as far as meal timing goes, this is a big one for a lot of people. And honestly, it doesn't really matter. Whatever you prefer, as long as your macronutrient intake for the day is the same. It doesn't matter if you prefer intermittent fasting or several small meals throughout the day, or even the 1 meal a day approach. These are all just different ways to reduce your calorie intake. But if that intake is the same, when it comes to fat loss, it makes no difference. So this is why I say, however you prefer, whatever helps you stick to the plan, that's totally fine. Now that being said, there could be some small differences when it comes to muscle gain, and this is kind of a topic for a different video, but you can only utilize so much protein in one sitting, so it may be more optimal to spread out your protein a little more evenly throughout the day. And if you're trying to do everything you can to build as much muscle as possible, then I personally recommend eating 3 to 5 meals per day, spaced out about 3 to 5 hours apart, with your protein-containing meals. And if possible, I think it is a good idea to have a good protein source as well as a good carb source, both pre and post-workout. But again, none of these things are anywhere near as important as your total numbers. And if it's going to sacrifice your total numbers to do this, then don't worry about it. We're talking the bottom tiny little bit of percentage. Okay, I just have a few quick hitters left that I want you to consider. One of them being, as much as I'm a huge proponent of flexible dieting, there can be some real value in repeating meals, meaning you kind of eat the same thing every single day, maybe a certain meal like lunch or whatever. You have the same thing every day because this way it's something you don't have to think about. You just always know, you don't have to worry about it. You can even meal prep ahead of time and have it all ready, and it just makes life a little simpler. You just have to understand you don't have to do this and you can change things up, but this can help simplify your life. Mentally, I think it's important to remind yourself that while yes, sustainability matters, also remember that your cutting phase is temporary, meaning this isn't something you're going to be doing forever. Yes, you have to make it a lifestyle, but this more difficult phase, especially as calories get lower, cardio gets higher, you start getting more run down, it's not going to last forever. So do what you need to do to get through that. Understand the time for more calories will be coming at the end as you go through your reverse diet, which is something that a lot of people miss. You want to make sure you gradually increase your calories post-diet to not only help yourself be more balanced and flexible, be able to enjoy more food, but also get your hormones and metabolism back into a better place and help you maintain on these higher calories. And then the last few things that are commonly overlooked that are still important for your fat loss and muscle building goals are things like sleep, stress, and water intake. Okay, plenty of considerations to take in with your diet. You already know how important strength training is, but how much cardio should you do? And what if you specifically want to burn belly fat? Well, to get the answer to that, make sure you check out this top video next. Otherwise, I think you'll like this bottom video instead. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll see you in that other video.